straightanswerflorida.org.
Good morning. I'm Jason Steele, and this is Straight Answer Florida. I'm the former director of the Division of Real Estate under Governor Jeb Bush, a recognized expert in real estate law and the courts, and a lifelong realtor. And today we're going to discuss Amendment 4. And I'm proud to tell you that we've got an exciting guest here with us, and his name is John Sebree. John is the Senior Vice President of the Florida Realtors involved in public policy, and one of the engineers of this exciting constitutional amendment that will be placed on the ballot in November. John, would you tell us a little bit about Amendment 4 and a little bit about yourself?
Sure, I'd love to, Jason. I live in Tallahassee and work for what is the largest trade association in the state of Florida, the Florida Realtors. We have 116,000 members, and our members really are on the front lines, and they know what the property owners and the wannabe property owners are saying about the market, probably better than anyone. They live it every day. And realtors were telling us that there was a huge concern that when property values were falling over the last couple of years, property taxes continued to increase. The legislature saw that as a huge issue and wanted to pass a constitutional amendment to fix that. At the same time, they thought, why don't we fix a couple of other inequities in the system as well? The truth is, the property owners of Florida love their Save Our Homes, and that's never going to change. So we have Save Our Homes. Now we need to make the system fair for other types of buyers as well. So the first-time buyer is one who, if there's a young couple buying right next door to me, the exact same house, same floor plan, I've lived in my house for 8 or 10 years, this young couple wants to buy, but because the property reassesses upon sale, they're going to pay taxes that are much higher than mine. Well, that's not really fair for this young couple that we're trying to get in the market, or the single buyer, the young family, maybe even a couple moving here from another state and living in Florida for the first time. So the legislature chose to give them some first-time homestead owner relief so that their taxes would be a little more in line with mine as the person who's been here for a while, but their benefit will phase out over 5 years. So it's a short-term benefit that helps them get in the property, but it phases out over 5 years while their Save Our Homes is phasing in. So it's really a very clever way to make our system much more fair. So I mentioned the first issue, which is making sure that your property taxes don't go up when your value goes down. The second issue in this amendment is the first-time homestead owner relief. Again, that's for any homestead buyer who hasn't owned a homestead in Florida in the past 3 years. And then it does one more thing. The constitutional amendment would put a 5% assessment cap on non-homestead properties. So Jason, you own a homestead property, I own a homestead property, we enjoy our 3% Save Our Homes assessment cap. But there are small businesses that can't really plan for the future because their property taxes can go up exponentially year over year, and they just want to know that they have some security so they can plan for the future. The current Florida Constitution has a 10% assessment cap for non-homestead properties. This would lower that to a 5% assessment cap. It's certainly not the 3% cap that we have as homestead owners, but it just makes our system much more fair.
John, I think that we all agree that we need major tax reform in the state of Florida. And in Amendment 4, we need to take a close look at what's going to happen and what the voters are going to be deciding in November. Let's dissect the amendment and basically look at all three components. Okay. The first thing is that Save Our Homes came about in the year 2000, and it was the greatest thing since sliced bread. Everybody thought Save Our Homes was going to save us from all of the escalation of real estate values. And as you know, Save Our Homes basically capped your assessment from going higher than 3% each year. But unfortunately, nobody knew that there was going to be a major downturn in the market. And what happens with Save Our Homes, and one of the biggest provisions of Amendment 4, is that when the market value goes down, what happens to the homeowner is his taxes go up. And let's talk about the first phase of Amendment 4, John, and how we're going to take care of the recapture provision of this constitutional amendment.
Sure, and just to be clear, Save Our Homes is actually 20 years old. It went in the Florida Constitution in the early 1990s. So it's been around 20 years, and we know how it works now. And like you said, there are unintended consequences. But currently, as you said, the voters of Florida put Save Our Homes in the Constitution, and we have a 3% assessment cap. We always thought there would be a time that property values would continue to increase, and they'll continue to increase, and they'll continue to increase. We didn't dream there would be a period like the past 4 years where property values would fall like they have, and they've fallen fairly considerably all across the state of Florida. Well, as the property values fell, what the voters of Florida, now the homestead property owners, didn't realize was that Save Our Homes would allow the county property appraiser to keep increasing the property assessment at 3% per year. It didn't matter that the values were falling, the assessment could still go up that 3% per year. Well, under the Constitution, no one can change that. You have to change the Constitution to fix the problem. And while that's unfortunate, we felt, and the legislature felt, that the legislature needs the power to fix this. So that's exactly what this constitutional amendment does. When people vote yes on 4 in November, they will be voting to give the legislature the power now to fix this issue, which is called recapture, to say that if your property value goes down in the future, your property taxes cannot go up.
Well, it's exciting that the Florida legislature would be able to visit the recapture issue. We're not quite sure how they're going to do that at this particular point in time, but one thing's for sure, we need major tax reform in this state. And this is a short-term fix. However, I think it's very important. But let's talk about what the Florida legislature may do and what they could do to fix recapture. John, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, it's actually just a simple bill. As soon as this amendment passes in November, and I'm sure that every voter watching the program today will want to vote yes on 4 to bring fairness to our property tax system and a property tax break to themselves. Once they vote yes, the legislature will then, in the very next legislative session, so in March and April of 2013, they will be able to come together and pass legislation that will instruct local government that they can no longer increase assessments when values fall. It's actually a pretty simple one, Jason. You know, a lot of legislation is complicated, but this is a pretty simple fix. The legislature can do it very simply.
The bottom line is that when your value goes down, your taxes won't go up in the event that Amendment 4 passes.
Exactly.
Let's move on to the second provision of the amendment, which I think is probably the last 2 provisions of the amendment are both very important. But I'm a big proponent of jobs. The economy in Florida has stagnated. The real estate market is in disarray, and one of the issues that's on Amendment 4's constitutional amendment is that we in fact have an assessment of up to 10% on commercial real estate right now. And the provision of this constitutional amendment would lower that to 5%. Could you address those issues, John?
I can, and Jason, it's actually a lot more than just commercial property. Any property in Florida that's not a homestead property. So anything that we don't live in as our primary residence. So that's second homes, investment properties, it's even vacant land in Florida. If I happen to save up and buy the lot next door to mine because I'm hoping one day to expand my current home or whatever the case may be, that vacant lot next door to me is non-homestead property because it's a separate parcel that doesn't have a homestead property with an owner-occupant living in it. So non-homestead property is a large segment. This isn't, you know, some people want to think that non-homestead or commercial property is just the big box store or the mall or something like that, but it's the mom and pop restaurant. It's so many things. And like you said, jobs are hugely important to Florida. We have been able This is extremely exciting and it's hot off the press. But Florida Tax Watch, which is an independent group headquartered in Tallahassee, a nonprofit think tank, they came out with a study just last week that shows this constitutional amendment will create 20,000 new jobs in Florida. And there are several reasons for that. That is that if the non-homestead property owner suddenly has this knowledge that their property taxes aren't going to increase exponentially year over year, they can plan for the future. Maybe it is a small restaurant or a family-owned motel near the beach. They haven't hired in a couple of years because the economy was bad, but they also didn't know how much their property taxes were going to increase year over year. But if they know they have a 5% assessment cap, they can plan for the future. And the study proves that when people can plan for the future and they have certainty, they're going to start hiring again. And that's wonderful for our entire market.
So a major component of this bill is predictability.
Predictability is enormous. If you're a small business person or even an investor, maybe I've lived in my house 10 years and I'm thinking, you know what, I just got a raise, I want to invest, I'm not really comfortable with the stock market, I want to buy a rental house to put in a rental pool somewhere. Knowing that my taxes aren't going to increase exponentially year over year is a huge reason why I might buy that property.
So to give an example of a commercial real estate property or a non-homesteaded property, let's say your value was $1 million. Under today's law, that value can be raised to $1,100,000 just by the cap of 10%. But if Amendment 4 is passed, that'll be reduced to $1,050,000, a 5% decrease, which will put money back in the economy and improve jobs. Is that what you're saying, John?
That is exactly, I couldn't have said it better, Jason.
Well, thanks. The next issue is an issue that I think is probably the one that has the most conversation about it, and that is the first-time home buyers and the exemption that first-time home buyers are going to get. Now, I have a lot of friends that are mayors and city council people from small cities across this great state, and they know I'm a proponent of Amendment 4. And they've asked me, Jason, you know, why are you such a proponent of Amendment 4? And what is it going to do to my city? And what's it going to do to our tax base? Let's talk about that a little bit, John, and decipher what it is that we need to do to alleviate the fear from the small cities.
Well, there are so many layers to this piece of the amendment, Jason. You're talking about the concern that some local governments have when property owners might be getting some tax relief. I think a lot of times local government looks at things, and we work very closely with local governments on so many very important issues, but local government gets a fear in them, for lack of a better word. They feel like if I'm going to get some kind of tax relief as a first-time buyer, they're not going to have revenue that they would have had otherwise. Well, the Tax Watch study dispels that myth, because what most people don't realize is that when someone buys a property, whether it's Florida or Iowa or Kentucky, no matter where you buy a property, $60,000 is pumped into your local economy. That's because people are buying refrigerators and stoves and new curtains, and they need a new lawnmower because they didn't need one in the rental where they lived. And the ripple effect through the economy is enormous. So that's an incredibly positive thing. If you remember back to a few years ago when really Florida was booming, you know, everyone knew things were booming. Jobs were being created every day. Extra revenue was coming into local governments and state government. That was because so much property was changing hands. When property changes hands, we have dock stamp revenue, we have sales tax revenue, and again, we have jobs. And when someone has a job and a paycheck, they're out spending and they're buying and they're renting or purchasing a home themselves. So the ripple effect through the economy is pretty enormous. So we believe the local governments should look at this for what it really is, and that's a job creator, an economic boom to our entire state, bringing more money into government revenues. In fact, the study shows And we don't talk about this very often, but local governments could potentially hire new people based on additional revenue that would come in. So it is a little bit frustrating, and the legislature has had this issue for a while. No matter what level of government, whether it's a local ordinance, a state law, a federal piece of legislation, no matter what level of government, a lot of times policy wonks want to look at things in a vacuum.
Wouldn't it also be true, John, that the more homes that are absorbed in each city, the more value that the existing homes will have, and the more value that the existing homes have, the greater the tax base will be, and ultimately speaking, once these homes are absorbed, and these are homesteaded properties, the city will have a thriving economy, and in addition, all of the values will go up, and as a result of that, their tax base would be greater.
Well, you raise an incredible point, Jason. Right now, no matter what community in Florida, we can drive down a street and see a vacant or abandoned home. You know, this economy has not been good for a lot of homeowners, and they've had to abandon their property. Well, when they abandon their property, values come down in the entire neighborhood. So getting a property back in tax-paying status is a wonderful thing for everyone, not only the government, of course, but the neighbors all around. Someone's finally taking an interest, paying the electric bill, mowing the lawn, and that's good for all properties all around.
In addition, John, the issue of portability. Some retirees have felt prisoners in their own home for a long period of time, and it's because they've not been able to sell their home. And they've not been able to use the difference between their Save Our Homes base and whatever the value is now with portability and move to a different place. What effect does that have? What effect does portability have on this issue?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because a lot of people have forgotten about portability. You know, portability was passed in January of 2008, right about the time the economy was falling apart. So very few of us have used portability to our benefit. But portability, for those who may not know, if you don't mind, I'll just say, is the differential that you've built up as a homestead property owner. So your assessments were kept lower at 3% per year, but your value over time had increased far greater than that. So you've built up this differential. Well, there was the concern back in 2007 and early 2008 that people were just stuck in their homes, and they didn't want to move to the new property, lose the Save Our Homes benefit that they had built up, and have a new property that reassessed upon sale. So this gave them the ability to take that Save Our Homes differential with them. Now, to get to your question, I'm sorry it took me a while, but we think this will be huge. A lot of times, you'll remember, Jason, a few years back, the federal government instituted a first-time homebuyer tax credit. A lot of people wanted to say, why are you always giving incentives to first-time buyers? Well, the truth is, when a first-time buyer enters the market, you now have a buyer for your home. Maybe you're an older couple that wants to downsize and move out of the family home where you raised 5 kids into a condo, or maybe you're a young couple that's a growing family and you want to move into a bigger house. Well, you were stuck in your property. You couldn't move because your property taxes would increase so dramatically. Well, having portability already on the books is a major benefit to us, because if we get these new buyers in the market because of Amendment 4, it's now going to allow those of us who want to upsize or downsize or just move and build a new home to take our Save Our Homes with us. And that's a pretty incredible benefit.
So let's just take a look at what Amendment 4 is all about and recap the amendment itself. It's going to be on the ballot in November, is that correct?
It is, and if I could point out, Jason, there are 12 amendments on the ballot. So, you know, everyone needs to remember number 4. Vote yes on 4, because there's going to be a lot of noise out there trying to overcome, you know, the talk of all the other amendments. So yes on 4 in November.
Okay, and there's 2 websites that they can go to, taxyourassets.com, is that correct?
Actually, there's taxyourassets.com. That's a separate group that is advocating for the amendment, but we're very supportive of that effort.
And Florida Taxpayers First, is that another group?
Florida Taxpayers First is also a group that is advocating for the amendment, and we're very supportive of that effort. And then, of course, floridarealtors.org. That's our website, and we have lots of information there for anyone who's looking on this issue or any issue.
So you can go to those websites and get as much information as you want. But let's take a look at Amendment 4 real quickly. Number one, one of the biggest provisions is that it eliminates recapture. It gives the Florida legislature the right to change the law so that when your values go down, your taxes don't go up.
Exactly.
Number two, an economic boost to the entire state of Florida by reducing the cap on commercial and non-homesteaded properties from 10% to 5%, which will put money in some of these wonderful retailers' pockets to be able to hire new people and to get new jobs. And number three, it will remove some of the existing inventory from the market by giving first-time home buyers a homestead exemption that's equal to 1/2 of the median price of the average home in the county. Is that pretty much accurate, John?
If I could just expand on that slightly, the beauty of this is so oftentimes when laws are passed or constitutional amendments are put in our Constitution, it's sort of one size fits all, and that's not how this amendment works. The legislature, in their wisdom, decided that we don't want to impact a small city more than we're impacting a large city or a small county versus a large county. So by tying the first-time homestead exemption, the additional exemption, to the median value of that county, it's a really beautiful thing, because if you think about how diverse Florida is, we have counties like Dixie County, Florida, where the median price of a home is about $47,000. Then we have counties, the county where Key West is, for example, Monroe County, the median price of a home there is about $275,000. So if you had a one-size-fits-all amendment, it would impact the small city and the small county more than it would others. And so the beauty of this is it's not one-size-fits-all. It's really geared by county, and we're extremely excited about the wisdom of the legislature in doing that.
One of the issues on Amendment 4 is who are the proponents of Amendment 4 and who are some of the independent groups that have done studies in regards to Amendment 4 that might be able to inform the taxpayers just exactly what Amendment 4 is about. And I believe that Florida Tax Watch is one of the independent groups that have voiced and put their opinion in on Amendment 4. And John, let's talk about Amendment 4 and Florida Tax Watch's study.
Well, Florida Tax Watch, as you mentioned, is a nonprofit, nonpartisan institution in Florida that's been around for over 30 years. And they take amendments like this, dissect them, figure out, what the impact on Florida's economy would be if these were to pass. I should point out, people may have heard about Florida Tax Watch because they're the group every year that pegs the budget turkeys. So when the legislature finishes its session, Florida Tax Watch goes in and says, these are the turkeys that the governor should veto, line item veto, because they don't belong in the budget of Florida. So they're really a watchdog group that's looking to save Florida taxpayers money. And we were happy when they looked at this amendment and said that this amendment, if passed by the voters in Florida in November as Amendment 4, would create nearly 20,000 new jobs in Florida over 5 years. That's non-farm jobs. So these are professional jobs, craftsmen, tradesmen, all kinds of jobs throughout Florida services. So that's exciting. But they also found, Jason, that it would increase personal wealth in Florida among all of us homeowners by over $5 billion. And this sort of goes back to something you said earlier about if we can get more buyers into our market, all of our values will start to increase a little bit. And that's exactly what this study found, that over $5 billion of increased wealth into Florida taxpayers' pockets just because of the ripple effect this will have on the economy. And then the gross domestic product of the state would increase by over $1 billion. So that's pretty huge.
The amount of realtors that are involved in Amendment 4 as proponents are obviously have a vested interest because of the home sales. Could you tell us how many homes that you think may sell over the next 10 years, John?
Well, and I could assume on my own how many I think, because I know it would be a large number, but the Florida Tax Watch study actually prescribes that number. It says that there will be between 350 and 400,000 new homes sold over and above the homes that would be sold otherwise over a 10-year period. So that's a pretty significant addition to the market that we expect to bounce back anyway. Those would be over and above properties that would sell otherwise.
Yeah, let's revisit one time what a new home buyer is and what you would need to do to qualify as a new home buyer. And would that allow people from, for example, the Northeast to come down even after they're retired to be qualified as a new home buyer?
Yes, there is a federal definition of who a first-time buyer is, and that's someone who hasn't owned a home in 3 years. So the state legislature looked at the federal definition and said, let's just use the 3-year number and apply that to Florida homesteads. So this could be someone who got out of the Florida market 5 years ago and now they're ready to buy again. They would be considered a first-time homesteader in Florida because they haven't owned a home in 3 years. But it could also be the person who's never owned a home in Florida, period, whether that be a new college graduate that just started their first job and they're buying their first homestead, or someone moving from another state. So like you said, the Northeast, it could be anywhere if they make Florida their homestead. This isn't about someone moving to Florida and buying a second home. They would be protected under the additional assessment cap of 5%, but they wouldn't be treated like a homesteader like you and I are treated. It's the homesteader. That means they're actually setting up housekeeping. They are moving into their primary residence, and they would be considered a first-time homesteader.
So this may give incentive to people to retire early and move to Florida and be a boom to the Florida economy.
Yeah, and come to Florida instead of Tennessee or North Carolina.
Yeah, once again, this is Straight Answer Florida, and you can go to straightanswerflorida.org for any questions or concerns. I'm Jason Steele, the guest host today, and with us is John Sebree, the Senior Vice President of the Florida Realtors involved with public policy. Thank you so much for tuning in, and if you have any questions, stay tuned to Straight Answer Florida.